Hello. It's still election season in America. I'm sure if you live in America, you will be well aware of that, especially if you live in a swing state. You'll be constantly being bombarded, and every single advert on TV will be about the election. So I thought what you could do with is some more election stuff because everyone loves that. No, I just thought we'd nerd out a little bit on some of the older presidential elections, put them into a tier list as we talk about them. We're going to start at the 1960 election, and we're going to go from there all the way till the 2020 election. I decided not to do elections before that because there's been a lot, and also they're quite different. Elections in the 19th century are very different from more modern day elections. I thought 1960 was a great cut-off point because it's I would consider probably the first modern election. It's the first election with presidential debates, for example. So yeah, we're beginning in 1960. And we're just going to go through the elections and rank them, talk about them, and obviously share your thoughts and feelings as well below. Let me know what you thought about the elections. So yeah, we're going to begin in the very close, very exciting, and very modern election in many ways of the 1960 presidential election. I think this is going to go high. Yeah, what could we say about the presidential election of 1960? It was close. It was damn close on the popular vote. If you look at the popular vote, we're talking just about 100,000 votes in it between President Kennedy and Richard Nixon. If we look at the previous election in 1956, we can see that Eisenhower pretty much won a landslide for the Republicans. He got 457 electoral votes to just 73 for the Democrats. The Democrats maintaining their strong southern support since the Civil War, but they were the only states to vote Democrat in that election. So obviously the Democrats had a lot to turn around, but they did turn it around. We can see on the Electoral College map, it's 303 to 219, so not quite as close as the popular vote would say and show. A lot of people talk about a lot of states, how Kennedy stole this election using the mafia to help him out, hiding ballots in Illinois, for example, in order to get the 27 electoral votes of Illinois to Kennedy. But if we actually look at that, yes, it was close, and there was about a few thousand votes in it, tens of thousands of votes in it, but if the 27 electoral votes did go to Nixon, it wouldn't change the election outcome. There was a few other states that were really close on a knife edge as well. Hawaii, I believe, was actually the closest state. That actually came down to a few votes. It was 92,000 each they both got. Kennedy got 92,410 to 92,295 for Nixon, respectively. But again, it's only 3 electoral votes, so it wouldn't have swung the election. It wouldn't have made that big a difference. I don't see why the wild claims of election fraud and election being stolen. I think it was a close election, obviously, but Kennedy obviously won decisively in the Electoral College. But yeah, this was an exciting election, mainly because it was the first election to have the debates. I believe the debates happened in 1960, and then they didn't happen again for a long time after. I believe until the 70s was the next debate. There's a very famous story about the debates. The famous story is that Kennedy won the debate on TV because he appeared good looking and sounded confident, looked confident. But people who listened on the radio thought Nixon won because, well, look at Nixon. If you were watching him on TV, he's not as good looking as Kennedy, is he? Obviously. So that's the story that a lot of people say, but that's not actually true. It's just a story people like to say about that election. Most people gave the first debate to Kennedy, regardless of whether you listened on the radio or TV, and most people actually gave the next 2 debates to Nixon. But it didn't really matter because the momentum was behind Kennedy. Kennedy was the first to actually use modern advertising techniques as well in his political campaigns. There was a very annoying campaign that went Kennedy, 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 Kennedy. It had no substance or policy to it, but it made you remember his name. And again, it came down to a knife edge. The candidates were obviously both ended up being presidents in their own right. Richard Nixon was coming off being vice president for 8 years under Eisenhower. Yeah, just a really good election, and one that people still talk about today, one that's still seen as iconic. I guess we'll move on to the 1964 election, respectively. Look at the 1964 election. It is a landslide for the Democrats compared to last time. If you look at it, is a 486 electoral college landslide to Goldwater's 52. But if we look, it's actually, this election is a very important election because it's the first election where the old South that used to just vote Democrat forever and ever and ever and ever, it's the first election that they all vote Republican, including Arizona, which was Goldwater's home state. Yeah, they always voted Democrat, and it was incredible to see this, to be honest. If we have a look, yeah, they all voted in 60, they all voted Democrat. We did have a breakaway party in the Dixiecrats, I think, led by Strom Thurmond, but certainly led by a crazy racist guy. So they were beginning to break away. We can see in 60 getting angry. Obviously, maybe some of what Kennedy were doing, some of the civil rights stuff, but Kennedy went big talking about it in the run-up to the election about civil rights. He was a bit more lukewarm. From 1960 to 64, it's a very different country because of the passage of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. I believe 1964 and President Johnson received the greatest ever black vote any president has ever got. I believe he got about 95, 96, 7%. Even Barack Obama didn't get that many African Americans to vote for him. Obviously, if you've just passed a bill to say we should allow black people to vote, maybe African Americans felt like giving that person the vote. In terms of how close this was, it was not close. It would not have been an exciting watch on election night, I imagine, unless you were President Johnson. But yeah, we can see an absolute, even the popular vote is just a complete landslide, 43 million to 27 million. As I said, that changing of these states becoming Republican is a sign of things to come. It's a sign that that old South is beginning to collapse and the Republicans are beginning to seriously challenge in that area. But yeah, in terms of how interesting it is compared to the 60 election, it's not as interesting for me. You don't have as cool characters. Goldwater was a bit nuts. There's a great campaign ad with Daisy picking a flower.
6, 8, 9,
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 0.
These are the stakes to make a world in which all of God's children can live, or to go into the dark. We must either love each other or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd.
Because Goldwater had a very hawkish approach to the Soviet Union, which was, let's just bomb this. Well, it was a bit more nuanced than let's just nuke them, but it was pretty much let's just nuke them. A very hardline stance that would have led to a certain escalation in the Cold War. So, yeah, that was a famous attack ad. But yeah, I don't think it's that notable an election, really. It's not one. It's only one that proper election nerds like me notice because of, again, that Republican changeover in the South. Which brings us on to the 1968 election. Well, this is bottom because obviously the worst person ever in human history wins the 1968 election. I'm joking, he's not the worst person ever. Second worst person ever wins the Richard Milhouse Nixon obviously wins for the Republicans. He finally wins an election. Well done, Tricky Dick. Yeah, it's an electoral college pretty much landslide. It would have been closer if these southern states had voted Democrat rather than voting for George Wallace. It was the George Wallace election. George Wallace, he managed to pick up 46 electoral college votes, big for a third party. You don't usually see third parties actually winning electoral college votes. But even if you'd have added them electoral college votes to the Democrats would have still come up short. This is a good election win for the Republicans. There is a little bit of people saying that maybe they just kind of looked their way into it, because obviously this is a very tumultuous year, 1968. It's the year in which Martin Luther King is assassinated. It's also the year in which the other Kennedy brother is assassinated, Robert F. Kennedy. And he was the pretty much almost presumptive nominee for the Democratic Party. And he was running on a anti-Vietnam War ticket, but the Democratic Party decided to choose the pro-war Hubert Humphrey. And that was an absolute disaster, and it led to chaos outside of the Democrats' headquarters, I believe in Chicago at the time. And yeah, it was just absolute chaos. And Richard Nixon came in and he said, "I'm going to bring law and order." He talked about a silent majority, and these were buzzwords that conservatives were going to be using and still use to this day. I think it's a little bit better than the 64 election. As I say, you had a lot of chaos going on in selecting the candidates and getting to that point. But yeah, I wouldn't rate it as high as the 60 election. So yeah, we're going to go in between. Maybe there. We'll go there for now. Which brings us on to the 1972 election, margin of victory in 72. It was a lot. He won every single state apart from one or two. It was an utter landslide over McGovern from Richard Nixon. The 1972 election is notable because obviously it's notable because of Watergate and what came out afterwards about the election, and the fact that the Republicans were attempting to spy on the Democratic Party. Why they felt they had to cheat to try and beat McGovern is baffling to me, because you were up against McGovern. It was a shoo-in. It was a guaranteed win. What are you doing? Yep, they decided to cheat and they got found out. Richard Milhouse Nixon had to resign. The only president that has actually had to resign. Ha ha. So that's kind of what marks this election. It was an utter landslide in 1972. It was probably Nixon at his height, in a way, in terms of popularity, in terms of his political power and his achievements. It would be kind of all downhill from here. The only interesting part about the 72 election is the stuff surrounding Watergate. McGovern was a no-hope candidate. He was never going to win. So yeah, I'm not putting that high, 1972. Is it above 64? It's around the same for me. As I say, the only real interest is the stuff around Watergate for me. So I'm putting it there. Which brings us on to the 1976 election, and this one was a shoo-in for the Democrats because of the Watergate fallout, and it's Jimmy Carter's election win, and Jimmy Carter still alive today. The man won an election nearly 50 years ago, and he's still alive. He was in his 50s when he became president, and he's still alive. He's 100 years old. He managed to vote, actually, in the 2024 election. He was a Democrat, so he voted for the Democrat Kamala Harris. But we can see the election, he only had really strong support in 41, lukewarm support for 153 of his electoral college votes. So it's not a stonking election win, but it's notable because he did win that old South, that old Southern Democrat South that was just solidly blue for 100 years or more. It's probably the last time that ever goes blue again. In terms of the electoral college vote, it's actually a bit closer than you'd think. It's about 297 to 240. So it's actually quite close-ish. But yeah, it's an election win for Jimmy Carter. His presidency would not be a successful one, unfortunately, for him. But he did win that election. And again, I think it was pretty much a shoo-in, really, wasn't it? Because of the fallout from Watergate. The Republicans winning California, that's a rare sight. You won't see that happening again until maybe Reagan. So yeah, some interesting things are happening, but yeah, I don't think I think we're beginning to see the movement of California becoming more blue. Places like Texas becoming more red. That kind of transition is happening right now. So yeah, the 76, it's just not as interesting for me because, as I say, it was just a complete shoo-in for the Democrats. So yeah, we're probably putting that in like a C. It's not even as interesting as 72 because 72 at least you've got Watergate, which brings us on to the 1980 presidential election between three people for some reason. Yep, John B. Anderson tried to throw his hat into the ring, but didn't win any votes or electoral college votes. He got about 5 million votes, but okay, good for you. Didn't mean anything. In terms of the actual election, it's a complete landslide. Both the Reagan elections are complete landslides, but it's actually kind of astonishing how well he does. You got to give Reagan credit. He was an election winning machine. And what you've got to be surprised about is the fact that we're coming off Watergate, and it was just the Republicans were completely reviled for Watergate, to then the Republicans win the 1980 election by a landslide. They win the 84 election by a landslide. They win in 1988. The Democrats must have been looking at themselves and thinking, what the hell has gone on here? They've just committed Watergate. How are we losing the election? Yeah, what a stonking win. You can't not give it to him. Going on around this election, you have the Iran hostage thing that was happening around this election. I believe just on Inauguration Day, when Ronald Reagan was being inaugurated, about 30 minutes after the hostages were released. So Reagan was able to announce they've been released on day one, so he got a bit of a day one boost. His actual polling in like 82-ish area, people were saying he's too old. His polling wasn't that high, and the economy wasn't doing that great. But then everything turned around for him, and he won another landslide election. Yeah, it's just not as interesting. You've got a third candidate running, which is interesting in itself. You don't usually get that. So I'd probably put it above the 1976 election, but not much higher than that. As I say, on election night, it would have been quite a boring watch, just watching all them states go red. And 1984 would have been a very similar story. Yeah, in 1984, it's just a complete and utter landslide. We're talking 54 million votes to 37 million votes. We're talking a 525 electoral college to just 13. It's notable in one way, this ticket, because it's the first time the ticket has a woman on it. She was a VP pick for the Democrats for Mondale, but obviously there were absolutely no hope of winning this election. There's a very famous exchange in the presidential debate in this one where Ronald Reagan gets asked a bit about his age.
Mr. President, I want to raise an issue that I think has been lurking out there for 2 or 3 weeks and cast it specifically in national security terms. You already are the oldest president in history, and some of your staff say you were tired after your most recent encounter with Mr. Mondale. I recall yet that President Kennedy had to go for days on end with very little sleep during the Cuba Missile Crisis. Is there any doubt in your mind that you would be able to function in such circumstances?
Not at all, Mr. Truitt, and I want you to know that also I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience.
The actual candidate himself, Walter Mondale, was laughing at Ronald Reagan's joke, and that's a bad sign if you're laughing at your opponent's joke. This is the biggest landslide most people will remember in their lifetime. There is no other landslide like this unless you're like a zombie and you lived in the George Washington times and you're an immortal being. Apart from that one guy who was an immortal being that was around in the George Washington times, this is the only time you've ever seen a landslide like this. So you've got to So it's notable in that sense. Yeah, just how big the landslide was. So I'd probably give the 1984 election a bit higher than the 1980 election. It's definitely better than the 1980 election. Is it better than 72? It's not as good as 72, in my opinion, which then brings us on to a bit more of a closer election in 1988 between Bush and Dukakis. Michael Dukakis? Dukakis. Yep. Most people thought that the Democrats had a chance of winning this one. A lot of the polling was saying the Democrats were going to win. So yeah, it was a bit of a surprise when it was not as close as people thought it was going to be. It was another not quite landslide. We're talking 48 million votes to 41 million votes. We're talking an electoral college of 426 to 111. I guess one of the big memorable events of the 88 election was the Dukakis riding in a tank, and he looked a bit silly, a bit stupid. He was trying to look a bit imperial and the commander-in-chief in waiting, but he just looked a bit silly riding around in a tank. The other famous thing about this election is Michael Dukakis he was big on against the death penalty. He didn't believe in the death penalty. So the famous question he got asked:
Governor, if Kitty Dukakis were raped and murdered, would you favor an irrevocable death penalty for the killer?
No, I don't, Bernard, and I think you know that I've opposed the death penalty during all of my life.
It wasn't the answer people wanted, because you've just talked about your wife being murdered, and his response was, well, and it just sounded very technical and proficient, and people wanted a much more emotional gut reaction to your wife being murdered. But yeah, people went for George H.W. Bush. Yeah, it didn't work out too well for H.W. Bush either. He was a one-term president. But in terms of the 1988 election, certainly it would have been a bit more interesting to watch the lead up to the debates, the build up. It wouldn't have seemed as much of a foregone conclusion as the last two elections. It's kind of similar to the 64-ish election, I guess, in my mind, but not as historically important. Yeah, I think we'll put that there. I think we're going to bump a couple of these up into the A category. Yeah, we'll leave it like this for now, and which brings us on to 1992 and the sax-loving Bill Clinton and his saxy saxophone that saxed away across America. Obviously, the Democrats went from like 111 electoral college in 88 to getting 370 under Bill Clinton. Fairly sizable election win. He took a lot is seen around this election as like a really important election for political analysts, the political nerds, because of what Bill Clinton employed the third way. So marrying like the economics of Reagan and Thatcher with the social and progressive views of the left, and kind of incorporating that into the third way. It's also a famous election because James Carville said it's the economy, stupid, when he was asked like what's voters' number one concern. In terms of the actual results, the Democrats were helped massively because we had a third party candidate, Ross Perot. The man nearly got 20 million votes. That's nearly half. That's half of what the Republicans got. That's just under half of what the Democrats got. The Ross Perot got a lot of votes, and he probably took more of the votes away from the conservative Republicans. He kind of split the conservative ticket in a way a little bit, though he did have some progressive-ish views as well. He wasn't just a complete Republican. That's why he ran as an independent. But it definitely helped the Democrats, I feel. So yeah, a lot of interesting stuff actually happening around this election. And yeah, he managed to unseat George H.W. Bush, and made Bush a one-term president. In many ways, Bush kind of got screwed over because Bush did the I will not raise taxes, watch my lips, I'm not going to raise taxes, and then he raised everyone's taxes. People weren't very happy about that, as you can imagine. Bill Clinton actually did really well in the debates because he memorized people's names who were asking the question, and he talked to them personally, which is a trick that all politicians do now, but brand new when Bill Clinton burst onto the scene. Bill Clinton himself, he was just a nobody that kind of burst onto the scene, the governor of Arkansas. He gave a goodish speech in the 88 election. Oh no, he gave a terrible speech, in the 88 election, Bill Clinton. And then he went on late night TV and managed to salvage the bad speech. He went on Carson. Carson made fun of him, but Bill Clinton equally made jokes. And then he played his saxy saxophone, Bill Clinton. That's what most people remember of this election, is Bill Clinton playing his saxy saxophone. Yeah, so it's entertaining. I say there's a lot more entertainment in this election. A lot of echoes of modern elections that you see. So yes, it's going quite high for me. It's going above the 68 election. Yeah, I'm putting it there. Yeah, which brings us on to the 1996 election. This one's just not as interesting as 92, let's be honest. People wanted Bill Clinton to be a one-term president because Bill Clinton lost the House and lost the Senate for the first time in a very, very long time for the Democrats. The Democrats had control of the House and Senate pretty much, not 100%, from 1933, from FDR, all the way up until 1992. So about a 60-ish year period, it was pretty much Democrat dominated throughout all that time, up until this moment when the new Republicans come in, led by Newt Gingrich, and they have a different approach, shall we say. Yeah, and they go and take the Senate and the House, and a lot of people were thinking maybe that Bill Clinton was going to be a one-term president, but no, because Bob Dole, as nice a person as Bob Dole is, Bob Dole wasn't the man at the time, and we can see it wasn't that close in terms of the popular vote. About 8 million difference between them. Ross Perot, he lost a lot more. He didn't get hardly anywhere near as much. He only got 8 million votes compared to last time when he was getting nearly 20 million votes. But again, he didn't help the Republicans in this election. But yeah, I don't think they needed much help. Did the Democrats? We can see the Democrats actually strengthening in New England and the coast, which is going to become kind of the bedrock of the Democratic Party. The coast and Illinois is kind of become the staple Democrat states, the staple blue states that we know now. But yeah, it's just not as interesting, the 1996 election for me, because it's got a lot of what the 92 election has, but just not as much, not as good, not as cool. So yeah, I'm gonna put 1996. It's probably ahead of 84. It's not as good as 88. I think 88 had a bit more interesting build-up to the election in terms of the debates, which brings us on to 2000. I'm sure that was a fine election, probably another boring one, right? Oh, no, it was the election of 2000, which was the closest election ever in US history. Yeah, pretty much. George Bush did not win the popular vote. More people voted for Al Gore, but that doesn't matter because it goes on the Electoral College vote. The Republicans just won enough, 271 to 266. If we actually look at the map, it is a very lukewarm Republican win in places like Florida, Tennessee. Tennessee is actually Al Gore's home state, so he managed to lose his own home state, which is insane. He also managed to lose Arkansas, and Arkansas is Bill Clinton's home state. For me, the Democrats lost this election. I mean, I don't even know if they actually did lose this election. That's how close this election was. It comes down to just a few hundred votes in Florida, which a lot of people talk about. But as I said, there was a few other states that were just on a knife edge as well. And if Al Gore had just won one of them states, he'd have been president. For me, it's more the Democrats just lost this one by being stupidly incompetent. They decided to back away from Bill Clinton, even though Bill Clinton was wildly popular. For some reason, decided to back away from him and his administration, which was a bad idea. As I said, Bill Clinton was very popular despite the Monica Lewinsky scandal and the impeachment. And there was a big October surprise when it came out that George Bush had been done for drunk driving. In terms of his experience, Bush, he didn't really have any. He was the Texan governor. He was the governor of Texas, but the governor of Texas is pretty much just a ceremonial role. They don't really have much power. It's compared a lot to like the King and Queen of England in terms of the power that they have, which is just mainly ceremonial. And again, that's what the Texas governor, that's what their role was. So apparently what George Bush used to do, he used to turn up to work as the Texan governor and be done within about 2-3 hours of in the morning, and by about 12 o'clock he'd start cracking open a golf game, and he'd be playing like PGA Golf 1994 on the Mega Drive or on an old computer. And yeah, he used to just play golf games, and that was his warm-up and prep for being the president. But luckily it was a very non-controversial time. Not a lot happened in his presidency. No big decisions had to be made, so it was all cool. No, wait. Yeah, that didn't happen. The 2000 election is peak elections. It could not be more of an interesting election. As I say, it came down to Florida in the end because Florida kept having recounts, and the recounts kept getting closer and closer. If you ask me personally, I actually believe Gore won Florida because a lot of African American votes were completely discounted, or thrown away because of reasons, shall we say. And a lot of them votes would have been Democrat votes because African Americans overwhelmingly vote for the Democrat Party, regardless of the hanging chads that everyone goes on about and the counting of the actual submitted votes. That's kind of irrelevant to me because, as I said, there was a lot of votes that were just completely discounted that should have been counted. And also Jeb Bush just happened to be governor of Florida. Nothing dodgy happened, obviously. It's completely legitimate. Democracy's obviously won out. Yeah, it's incredibly interesting. The 2000 election is probably more interesting than the 1960 election, if I'm being honest. I personally would probably rather study the 1960 election. Maybe it's because it's a bit more of a the more recent something is, the harder it is to look back on it with clarity and not be too driven by partisan feelings. Obviously, I'd have probably voted for Al Gore, so maybe I'm still bitter and mad, even though I was literally a baby at the time, so I wasn't actually very mad or angry at the time, to be honest. But yeah, 2000 is just, wow, what an election night, what an election cycle. And how the hell did you manage to lose that, Gore? How the hell did you manage to lose that? Which brings us on to 2004, which was the only election in my lifetime where the Republicans have won the popular vote. It's the only election since 1988 where the Republicans have won the popular vote. But of course, American elections aren't won on the popular vote, they're won on the Electoral College. And the Electoral College was not an absolute landslide, and the Electoral College was actually quite close for this election. Not as close as the 2000 election, but Bush actually only got 15 more Electoral College votes in the 2004 election. So it was actually a bit closer than a lot of people give it credit. Although he did win the popular vote by about 3 million votes. So yeah, I think the 2004 it's obviously nowhere near as close as 2000. but I think a lot of people brush past it a little bit. Yeah, I understand why. Maybe the candidates aren't as interesting. John Kerry's a perfectly fine person, good person, but not the most interesting person. Same for George Bush, to be honest. He's a colourful character, but he was never seen as the smartest person in the room. So yeah, I'd probably put 2004 is not as interesting, obviously, as 2000 itself. So where do we put it though? It's above 1988 for me. It's probably just behind 72. Yeah, it's probably around there for me. Which brings us on to 2008. This is the actual election, the first election I actually remember. I remember the build-up. I was about 12 at the time. As I say, I probably didn't have the best political insight. But yeah, I do remember this election. I remember it really well. The economy starts to collapse during the election. So there's that going on. And then there's the very famous clip. John McCain gets asked a question by a crazed Republican.
I got to ask you a question. I do not I can't trust Obama. I have read about him, and he's an Arab. He is not. No?
No, ma'am. He's a decent family man, citizen that I just happen to have disagreements with on fundamental issues, and that's what this campaign is all about. He's not. Thank you.
And if you want to have a moment to see like how far crazed America has got, just listen to John McCain's concession speech in 2008. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful concession speech. But yeah, Barack Obama, clearly he was the man for the moment. But this actual election cycle, lots of interesting stuff going on. There was a battle in the Democratic nomination pick between Hillary Clinton, who was pretty much seen as it was her time to become the president, and Barack Obama. And Barack Obama managed to win that. He had a very famous speech where he said, "We're not red states, we're not blue states, we're the United States of America." Yeah, a very, very interesting election. Yeah, in terms of the actual electoral college, it's not very close. In terms of the popular vote, it's not very close. There's 10 million votes difference between the both of them. The Illinois senator did very well in 2008, a great election victory. Not as close or interesting as elections like 2000 for the politics nerds to be analysing over and over again. So yeah, 2008, yeah, just I think the candidates really set this one apart for me. The candidates were just two excellent candidates. I think America did very well picking these two candidates. So, but in terms of the closeness of the result, not very close. It wouldn't have been crazy interesting on election night. Some interesting moments, some great moments in building up to the debate. Yeah, but I don't want to be too biased because, as I say, this is the first one I kind of remember. I didn't stay up all night because, again, I was like a child and I had to get up for school the next morning. But I do remember getting up and, Barack Obama's president. Oh, that's nice. And, yeah, it was different. It was very different from George Bush, was Barack Obama. He was very different around the world. But yeah, I'm going to put this one relatively high, I think. Is it above 72? Probably not. It's definitely above 2004. It's more interesting in 2004. Yeah, it's either above or behind 72 for me. I don't know why. I'm struggling to decide. I'm gonna go just above 72. 2012, that super exciting election that everyone remembers. I do actually remember 2012 because I was doing my politics A-level. Kind of the only big taking away of the 2012 election is that, yeah, this was kind of the moment when he'd won the election. That was the moment. It was pretty much all over from that point onwards. I do remember other funny things coming out of this election. Apparently there was a story that Mitt Romney put his dog on the roof of a car or something, if I'm remembering that right. And it was the Gangnam style because that was a trend that lasted forever. Remember that? That song was going crazy at the time, and there was Mitt Romney style, which was a famous, well, it was famous for about a month, and then everyone forgot about it forever and ever. Probably rightly so. And it was, as I said, the build up to the actual election, people were just seeing it as a pretty much Obama were going to win, and Obama won. And yeah, the debates weren't that interesting coming out from this. It's about as interesting as 1996, I'd say. It's about that level of interest. Is it more than 96? It's probably less than 96, because at least 96 they had a third party candidate, made it a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to put it just behind that, which brings us on to the easy peasy, non-controversial 2016 and 2020 elections. Yeah, I remember these ones. These are the ones I actually stayed up for on election night. I remember this election night very, very well. Yeah, I remember this election night in 2016. It was, well, my side lost. I was obviously wanting Hillary Clinton to win, and a lot of the polling was indicating she was going to win, and she didn't. It wasn't actually even too close on the Electoral College. It was 304 to 227. People talk about not going to Wisconsin and Michigan, but if we'd have changed them around, it still wouldn't have flipped the results. She'd have needed also to have flipped Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, they were the ones that kind of cost this election, and that's the one a lot of the political analysts were talking about after the election. She lost the old Rust Belt. A lot of the former working class, heavy industry towns that have lost a lot of that manual labour jobs. To look at the popular vote, this is the fourth time, I believe, that the person who won the popular vote did not win the presidency. Obviously, she got about 3 million more people voting for her, but that didn't matter. That did not matter. It was an utter shock on election night. I remember it was pretty much over. He was almost on to 270. It was pretty much over. And if you know how it goes on election night, you get the first eastern state results through first, because the time difference, obviously they're a little bit ahead. And the last states you get through are always these states on the west coast, usually. Some states are a little bit slower to count, looking at Nevada, than others, but generally that's the rule. And as I say, it was getting pretty close to Trump about to win. And my friend was turning to me and saying, but we've still got Idaho and we've still got Alaska. And I was like, mate, it's over. Trump's president. And he was desperate. He was desperately clinging, hoping that there was going to be a blue wave in Idaho and Montana. And yeah, people were in shock, utter shock. Do you know who was also in utter shock? Donald Trump himself. He could not believe what was going on election night.
It had been the floor where they had filmed The Apprentice. And so we're gathered in there, Ivanka, Mike Pence, Reince Priebus. I remember taking a bunch of video, and we've got a projector on the wall with the results coming in.
Donald Trump will carry the state of Florida. This night is...
Suddenly someone starts to realize we might win this thing. And Trump was up in his residence, and he calls Ivanka. And she says to him, he says, well, where are you? And she says, we're down on the 5th floor. And she said, why don't you come down, Dad? And he's just standing there watching the TVs. Everyone around him kind of going nuts. And he's just soaking it in. That's the moment where he realized, oh my gosh, this is really about to happen.
Donald Trump wins the presidency.
The business tycoon and TV personality with an astounding upset victory.
Yeah, we were all completely in shock, utter shock at what happened on that night. Yeah. So yeah, even Donald Trump himself, you could tell he was not expecting to win on election night, but he did. Yeah, 2016 is one that's going to be studied for a long time. People are going to talk about for a long time. It's a deeply interesting election. There's no doubt about that. It's just behind the 1960 election. I might even be being a bit biased there. It's probably ahead of the 60 election in terms of interest. Yeah, it was utter insanity. And that's not even mentioning a lot of the build up to that election, the debates that were crazy. A lot of people said that Hillary Clinton won the debates, but it didn't seem to matter. Yeah, so that brings us on to the 2020 election, the one that Trump lost. Haha, Trump. No, I'm not bitter. Yeah, Trump lost this election. I think the fact that it was during a lockdown, during the COVID pandemic, didn't play into Trump's strength, because Trump liked to do them. Trump's super strength and superpower was the mass rallies that he did in front of hundreds of thousands of people. And that just wasn't possible during the COVID pandemic. And Joe Biden was able to sit in his basement in Delaware and run his campaign from there. And I guess that played into Joe Biden's strengths. If we actually look at the election results in 2020, despite a lot of people crying and saying that it was stolen, it was actually not even that close. It was 306 to 232, and the popular vote was 81 million to 74 million, so about 6 million more people voted for Joe Biden as opposed to voting for Donald Trump. Yeah, it's not as close an election as the 2016 election. It's not quite as interesting an election, I suspect, as the 2016 election. Though, again, it's really hard to say with these more modern elections because we haven't had the fullness of time to reflect back on it. And it's still too raw, it's still too fresh in the memory. And yeah, maybe it's hard to look back and analyse objectively in that sense. If we look at the counties and how strong a win it was, we can see that these Michigan, Wisconsin and Pennsylvania all went Democrat, and that was crucial in swinging the election result. We also see Georgia becoming Democrat, which is insane, because this used to all be the Republican stronghold ever since the 1972 and the Southern strategy employed by Nixon. That had always been very solidly Republican. So yeah, it was a big shock to see Georgia go blue. Probably it was part in due to the large African American population that lives in Georgia. But yeah, in terms of the actual 2020 result, I don't think it's as interesting as the 2016, but it's really hard to analyze. So I'm just going to put it in quick and not think too much about it. It's probably ahead of 2008, really, around there. Probably ahead of 2008. Yeah, so my final orderings and rankings, I guess I've put 2000 as the most interesting, followed by 2016, followed by 1960. Coming up next is 92, then the 1968 election, the 64 election, the 2020 election, 2008, and then the most boring elections, the ones that send me to sleep, were the 1976 and 1980 and 1984. Yeah, that's my rankings of the most recent elections from the 1960. Let me know what you think. Was there some elections that you would rate higher, some elections you'd rate lower? Are you looking forward to the 2024 election? Yeah, let me know below. Thank you for watching. See you on the next video. Adios.